If we haven't met already, or if this is your first time joining us for How To Tuesday, my name is Camille Abdel-Jawad. I am your instruction outreach librarian. I'm really glad to be here with a special remote guest, Dr. Alex Silvius. He will be joining us virtually for a segment in this How To Tuesday as our very first and very special guest, because today we're talking about how to read a journal article. And this is a really, really critical skill for all PARCC students. So we thought, who better than to teach you how to write a scientific article or a scientific journal article than one of our excellent science faculty. And we'll talk more about what that will look like here in just a second, but I want to just say, if this is your first time attending How To Tuesday with us, welcome. This is our monthly webinar series. This is actually the last one for the whole semester. So we have been doing these once a month for the entire year. And this is really just a 30-minute webinar where we talk through some frequently asked questions or frequently asked topics, such as reading a journal article or how to write an annotated bibliography or use some of our library resources. So you can actually register for all of our How To Tuesdays online at our library website, library.parcc.edu. And as a special sneak peek to all of you who are here live or watching back later, we have some really exciting news about what's going to be happening to How To Tuesday. For next year, we will be back and we will be more frequent. So we're really, really excited about that, and more details will be pushed out to all of you very, very soon. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. So today we're going to be kind of talking through how to read a journal article. And, one question I get a lot from students is, why should we practice reading a journal article? What's the big deal? Why is it different than just reading a textbook or reading any other thing that we read, right? But to be honest, it is really different. And a lot of times students can get very confused or overwhelmed because it's a lot more difficult than we anticipate when we first start, right? So we think that this is a really important skill for students to develop, because it is a really critical thing that if you can nail reading a journal article, this will set you up for really great success throughout your entire college career. And today we're going to be talking about how to read a scientific article. So that would include anything from any of our sciences like chemistry or biology or physics, but it would also include, our social sciences. So anytime someone's using a survey, anytime anyone's doing interviews, any kind of research like that, that is also included in this methodology of reading an article, right? So if you're reading anything for education, for social work, anything that has a social science component, or it's using real people to evaluate and do research with, this is what you'll use to apply it. The only thing this probably won't cover are our humanities folks that aren't doing empirical research, that maybe are analyzing literature, or that are analyzing primary sources, excuse me. Those kinds of things might be a little bit different, but this is a really solid framework for most of the journal articles you're going to come across as you begin to research with the library. And it's really important to remember, and Alex is going to talk a lot about this, that not every article you come across is going to be relevant to your research, right? Not every single article that you come across is going to be ones that you should use. So how do we determine which one to use and which not to use without having to read the entire thing, right? Journal articles can be anywhere from 10 to 20 pages. So if you have to look through 10 different ones just to find one article, and you have to read all 20 pages, that would be a lot of work, and you may not even end up using that article. So we want to teach you today that there is a better way to do that. There's a better way to go ahead and analyze resources without having to read the whole thing point blank from start to finish. And this is a really key strategy that we want to talk to you about and give you the tools for. So Dr. Alex Silvius, he is our associate professor of physics. If you've had a chance to take class from him, he is really wonderful and has a really great breadth of knowledge on this topic. And I asked him to join me today for our How To Tuesday because he has some really specific framework that he recommends students utilize because it can give you a tool in your toolbox to then utilize. So I'm going to go ahead and put into the chat one more time the link to all of the resources today. That way you have them. And then I am going to go ahead and do a new share and share the video that Alex created for us today. So we'll go ahead and do that. After that, we'll do some Q&A and have some time to answer questions. So don't worry, if you have a question, write it down, and then I'll be back on afterwards to answer any questions that you have. All right.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Silvius here at Park University, and I'm here to speak with you on how to read a scientific journal article. Often people think it would be the same as reading their textbook or reading the newspaper, but there are some specific strategies I want to talk about that will help you be more efficient and not waste time so that it won't seem like a slog. One of the things I want to show you, and I'll reference, is an infographic that is published on this exact subject. It is how to read scientific papers. And when you look at it, it'll basically tell you to read the paper about 3 times. But each of those will have a specific purpose, and the first one is extremely short. At the beginning, you want to skim the article. The first thing you're doing is identifying what the article is. Basically, you want to see its structure. Most of the articles will have the IMRAD structure. I am rad. Yes, I am. It stands for the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. In this format, which is pretty standard, I'm used to it, analysis is included in the discussion part. Some articles will break it out separately, but mostly that's the structure you're looking for so that you can easily identify it. When you read an abstract, I can't stress this enough, you use the keywords in your library searches, you find a bunch of articles, hopefully your net is cast wide enough, they all include some keywords. Read the abstracts carefully because that'll tell you whether you want to read the rest of the paper or not. So that way you don't feel like you need to read 30 papers to find 10 that are useful. You need to read 30 abstracts to find 10 papers that you want to use. Those abstracts are going to be anywhere from 1 paragraph to maybe a page, but most of them are about 1 to 2 paragraphs, 100 to 200 words. So when you're reading those, you want to look for the purpose or the rationale of the study. In other words, why they did it. If it's not clear why they did it, it's probably either a poorly written article or it may not be useful to you. You want to quickly be able to understand why they did it. The second thing is the methodology will be described succinctly in the abstract. So if they're doing it in a completely different way to you, that might be useful or it might not. You might be looking for a specific procedure, and so that will quickly help you identify it. This question is the how they did it. The next thing in the abstract would be the results, what they found. If the results are not useful to you, or the results are something that is not part of what you're looking at, then you may want to put that paper to the side. But it's always good to look at the results and see what they found. The conclusions, it's usually very short, and so it might be 1 or 2 sentences of what they found in their study, what it means. So remember, the abstract should answer the questions why, how, what, and so what they found and what it means. as you get into a subject deeper, you may read a lot of articles, and as you get later in your career of studying a certain thing, experts in a certain field will sometimes skip the abstract and go straight to the graphs. If they look at the graphs and they see something that's interesting to them, that's another way they filter papers they want to read. If the graph or the information that they see very quickly is interesting, then they'll choose that to read it. But at the beginning, when you aren't an expert in the field, you want to go ahead and read the abstract thoroughly and decide, is it the no, maybe, or yes? Keep the maybes around. You might want to look at them again later. So the next reading, so that first skim, I would say read the abstract. If it's a yes, you skim very quickly through to answer those questions, see some of the graphs. When you reread, you're looking for some very specific features in the paper. In the introduction, you're looking for what is known about the subject. This is the background, as they often say. What is the current knowledge? And more specifically, what is not known, which is sometimes the purpose of the paper. When they say, well, no one has measured it at this temperature. No one has measured these animals at this time of year. And so that will lend to where they're going with the study. And that leads to the focal point of the paper, the question the authors want to answer or are asking. So that's where the introduction leads you through this. The next section you would come to would be in the IMRD paper, would be the methods. So this is still that first read where we want to read and see the specific pieces of the article. We want to understand in the methods. I encourage you to take the notes, because what I've found is when I've read an article, it's been great and I have it in front of me. If I just have the article, even if I highlight it, I'm always having to search through the paper again. Some people will say use an annotated bibliography, but that really just tells you what was of interest. If I'm taking notes on the paper, I want to have it on a separate thing that I'm writing down the methods that are of interest. If that's of interest to me, say an analytical chemist or a biologist want to know how they did a specific procedure. A social scientist might want to know how a survey or study was done and what the end values, the number of people are in it. These are things that you need to look at. If the methods say aren't analyzed clearly, you may not catch a problem like they have too small of a number of people and they're making claims that they shouldn't, things like that. So once they have done their methods, they'll talk about their results and discussion. This is where you'll see graphs. This is what they came out of their study, the discussion, the analysis there. You should take note of any findings that they have, like this was elevated for this population. The measurements in this part of the world were different than other parts of the world. Make note of those. There's a lot of questions, as you see in the infographic. There's some basic questions that that you want to be able to answer. After reading this, can you answer what is the problem that this study tried to solve or was looking at? Is it repeatable? What factors might affect the results? So again, you're trying to think about the paper of what it's doing. And so the next part, and I don't know that I would call it even a third reading, it's now interpreting, because I've read the article thoroughly and I'm going back as I interpret it. I'm reading specific sections. I'm reading the caption of that graph again. So it's helpful to think of these as multiple readings, but you've done a skim and you've done a thorough reread. And now your interpretation is going through the different pieces and trying to see if you can understand it and what you're taking from that. When you summarize it, you are taking the notes to improve what you're looking at and looking at what the main points of the paper should be. So if we look at the document as a whole, the main points, you'd say, okay, there's a title, there's an abstract, there's keywords. Keywords are helpful in finding other things of that. And I should have said this earlier when you're looking at the abstract earlier on. When there's a word that you aren't familiar with in reading a paper, take note of it and look it up. It often a terminology or jargon will be used throughout a paper, especially if it's very specialized, and they won't define it because it's considered common knowledge in that field. But if you go look up other sources, they will give you the answer of what that is. And so you need to know those words if it's common and used throughout the paper. As you're reading the paragraphs and trying to interpret and summarize, you want to look for surprising statements, unexpected. These words are signifying this is something either different or noteworthy when you're reading the paper. In contrast with previous work, that means their findings contradict other work, which is very significant when you're working through one of these papers. If somebody disagrees with somebody else, now you have a question that needs to be answered. So when they say we hypothesize, that's obviously leading into their hypothesis, or it could be in the discussion where they are presenting a question for the next paper, for the next study, someone else to look at. These are all noteworthy phrases to look at and then see what are they saying there, what came after that. By the end of the summarization, you should be able to look at and answer the questions of who are these authors, what journal is this in, so do you question the credibility of the journal or of the source? If it's a blog, is it a well-respected international scientific journal? Have I taken the time to understand the terminology? If there are still words in parts of it that you don't understand and you don't have a definition for, you might be misinterpreting it. So do look at that terminology. What specific problem did they address? These are all just questions, and I'll include this document for later for students to use if they want to look at a paper with this. So I won't go through all of them, but these will help you when you go to draw inferences. You might be wanting to analyze a single paper and interpret it and then present that information, but you also might want to take multiple papers, and with that knowledge from the multiple papers, you can now make a further inference, a critical review of all of that information that is something that even those researchers may not have looked at. And that's why this is very valuable. So now let's look at a paper, and it's fairly technical and specific, but I want to look at it and try and just see if you can answer the questions without understanding the whole subject. If we use the tools that I've talked about, we can look at like the abstract and see, is this a paper that would be effective in what I want to review? So we read the title, the use of gold nanoparticles as an effective modifier for the determination of arsenics and antimony by electrothermal atomic absorption spectrometry. Okay, so we have our authors. We've looked at this. This is in a journal. I personally don't know, but this was picked. This is an article or a journal focusing on analytical chemistry, looking at detection of certain pollutants. And they're going about this using gold nanoparticles. There's some jargon in here that you can pick up, but if you didn't recognize it, then you could go look for it in other sources. So in the abstract, which is what we will zoom in on now, here we have the abstract. Gold nanoparticles, or AUNPs, so AU being the chemical symbol for gold and nanoparticles. And it's nice when they present an acronym or other jargon and explain that to you, so others who might be interested in detection of a pollutant may not be familiar with the jargon of the gold nanoparticles. So they've introduced that and explained it. And at the very beginning, we're asking our questions of an abstract. What is the purpose? So gold nanoparticles were used as a new chemical modifier for the determination of arsenic and antimony in salt solutions. Okay, so right there, they've already introduced at the beginning of the abstract what they did that was different. The phrase new chemical modifier or innovative, whenever you see those keywords, they are telling you what they did that was different than somebody else. Now, just because it's different may not be helpful, but that's what they did that was different. The gold nanoparticles were prepared by reducing chloroauric acid with sodium citrate. The effects of the pyrolysis and atomization temperatures. The amounts of the interference and modifier on the sensitivities of arsenic and antimony were investigated. So if I'm an undergraduate student, I maybe have heard some of these terms, but I heard them once in a lecture and I need to go back and highlight them and look them up. But I know that they are using different procedures, pyrolysis and such, to look at what they're doing. So now they have answered the question of how they did it, the methodology. So the next thing we should be looking at is the results. Arsenic and antimony remain in the graphite tube up to 1,100 degrees Celsius, which is sufficient for the determination of the two metals in certified reference materials and spiked seawater samples with a 95% confidence level and low RSD 10%. Again, if you haven't had the statistics to know what those terms are, you would go look them up, but they're considered common knowledge at this level, so they're not going to define them. They've now said their results, and as they say, the detection limits for the arsenic in seawater are 2.3 micrograms per liter and 3.0 micrograms per liter, respectively. Almost no background, as well as a blank value, was detected for the gold nanoparticles. What they're saying is, here are the results. They had an increase of the ability to detect it. That was the result of this paper. If this paper was something that I was looking at spectrometry, I was looking at the detection of arsenic, then this would be a value. If I was worried about mercury detection, maybe it might be useful to look at this as a side thing to say, this is another procedure, but this wouldn't be directly what I'm looking at. So I've identified what they've done, and I can effectively filter this paper, whether it's useful or not. I've looked at it in terms of the journal, the article, and the date to say, okay, that's fairly recent. If we get past 10 years, if we're getting to 25 years, a lot of things have changed in terms of detections and things like that. So you always have to be aware of how old the article is, because if it's too old, then a lot of things may have changed by that point. And we can see all of that with the abstract. I'm not going to go through the whole article. I just want to see that this, in a couple of minutes of reading, helps us see whether we want to use it or not. The other really important thing to take note of are the keywords, because maybe your first filter through the library, and then you find good articles and they all include the same keyword that you didn't include. Maybe you can go back and do another search, including some of those new keywords that will help you. And certainly you should look up any keyword that you don't understand as you're reading these articles. I wanted to thank Camille for the time to speak today about this. This is a very important subject for students, and often we don't have a moment where anyone has said this is how you read a paper. So it might be the expectation that you can sit down with a paper and know what you're doing, but if you've never had the opportunity to learn it, it's not in your toolbox yet. So hopefully I've provided some insight into what would be a toolbox for this.
All right. So that was Dr. Silvius on our wonderful physics faculty member on how to read a journal article. And, he gave you some really awesome framework using that infographic to give you some framework of how to read a journal article, right? So it's not the same as reading a textbook. It's not the same as any other article or any other resource that you might read. Instead, there's kind of a technique or a tactic that you would want to use in order to determine whether that article is going to be relevant for your research. We don't want you to waste your time reading a million articles that won't be relevant. So this is kind of a step-by-step framework. And again, if you want that infographic, I linked all of the resources that Dr. Silvius alluded to and talked about in our Google Drive folder, and the slides are in there as well. So if you have any questions about that, or if you want to kind of go back and take a look at that one again, or even save it for future reference, would be awesome. I put that all in the link in the chat, and so you can feel free to go in and do that. I'm going to share my screen one more time to put up my contact information for you, and I would love to hear any questions that you guys have for me about reading journal articles, about how that all works, how to determine whether an article is relevant for your research. If you have any questions about what Alex said, I'm happy to answer those for you now. You can either put it in the chat or feel free to unmute and pop on with any questions you have.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, great. So I have a question. When you're doing this, how do you know if there's too few subjects in the study?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So that is like a very complicated question. They call it being statistically significant, right?
Okay.
So the researcher will say this is a statistically significant study or it's not. And generally you can tell based on the population and how many participants participated, right? So like if I had 10 Park University students that I surveyed out of, and like my whole demographic was all Park University students. Out of 10,000 is not a very, significant part of the population, right? But if, I surveyed 8,000 of our Park students out of 10,000. Now that is a really good indicator. Now it's a lot more complicated than that, but you can kind of tell based on that, and they should say if it's significant, statistically significant in the paper. So you shouldn't have to determine that all on your own. Does that help? Do you have any follow-up questions to that?
Yes, because I've been doing research on TBIs, and the years down the road after the TBI and the results of that. And so when you look at the amount of people in the military that have TBIs, the numbers are really huge. And then I see, like, we studied, 200 individuals with TBIs, and it seems like such a small number compared to the amount of number that have had them. So that's why it's kind of confusing, especially when you're looking at something as big as this,
Yes.
So
Totally. And I will say it is really difficult to get a statistically significant number of participants, right? A good majority is very, very difficult to get. So that doesn't mean that the study is completely irrelevant, right? There's a difference between, a study being conducted really well and having a fair number of participants, and a study that handpicks participants and has an insignificant number of participants that maybe you should have a few question marks about, right? So it's really nuanced, and I can actually send you more information on this if you're curious. Or if you
yes,
want
please.
Okay, yeah, let me send you. Why don't you put in the chat to me a good email, and I will send you some more thoughts on that.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions that anyone has? That was a really good question.
Nobody else has a question. I have two more.
Oh, okay, let's do it.
Okay, great. So age range, when you're looking at for philosophy, or not philosophy, for psychology, and you're looking at something like what I'm researching now, how far back? Because he was saying basically like 10 years, maybe 20 years. And I found a lot of times is that there's a huge gap where there's almost no research done on something. So in order for you to find something chronologically, you just have these big, huge gaps. So safely?
Yeah, that's also an excellent question. And I hate to say this, but the answer really is nuanced again, right? So there's never anything straightforward in research, I guess. But really, it depends on your topic. There isn't like a hard, never use anything more than 10 years old, right? There's a good rule of thumb to say, within the lab, if it's more than 10 years old, you should proceed with caution. And one thing that you can do is if you found a study or if you found something that you want to use in your research that is older than that 10-year mark or 15-year markish, you can find more current resources and show connection between them, right? So if a more current resource confirms what this older resource says or builds upon it, you can use both of them in tandem. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so it just really depends. Like if you're studying social media, you wouldn't even want anything from 10 years ago, right? That would have been 2013. Social media looks so different in 2023 than it did in 2013. So that 10-year rule out the window, right? You would want things from the past 3 years probably. But if you're studying, this chemical gold properties, maybe 10 years is fine, right? Again, it just depends on your topic, but that's a great tip of, finding other articles that reinforce or complement or connect those two resources to back each other up. That's a great way to do it.
Thank you. Last one.
All
Because
right.
I wrote them down.
I love it.
Let's see. So is descriptive for results. I guess the question on that is how do you really tell whether or not it is a legitimate source? Like, so yesterday I found something that was from it was the National Indian Journal of Psychology. So is there I know with social media or even with news outlets, you've got your far right, your far left, and kind of where you can find in the middle where these are good sources.
Yeah.
So is there like a guide like I got from my philosophy teacher that said, hey, don't listen to these guys or these guys over here, just this? So
that is really tricky too. For news outlets, yes, you can actually Google news outlet spectrum and it will show you ones that are far left or right and then kind of middle-ish. I can send you some resources on that, but that's mostly for news outlets. For journals, it's a lot more difficult, right? Peer-reviewed journals that have been reviewed by other scholars in the discipline to ascertain the validity of it. Those are pretty trustworthy. Now, there are lots of flaws with the peer review process. We can talk about that at length another day. But yeah, I know.
right.
It is a general rule of thumb that those are pretty reputable resources. Now, if you are an upper level student, let's say in philosophy, it might be worth your while to kind of do a little bit of research. What are the top journals in philosophy, right? If you're doing a philosophy research project, because there's going to be some top journals, there's going to be some middle tier journals, and there's probably going to be some journals at the bottom that maybe aren't as well respected in the profession. Doesn't mean the content that they're posting is incorrect or invalid, but they maybe are newer or don't have the same reputation in the community of scholars that those high level competitive journals have. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. You can Google the journal name, but as far as the actual content in the journal, if you're like, oh, that sounds kind of, you know, interesting, I wonder if anyone else is talking about that. My best advice again is to look for other resources on that same topic. Are they in conversation? What is that journal article citing? So look at their work cited. What kind of articles are they citing? Are they citing them appropriately, or are they taking what they're citing out of context? Those are all really good questions to ask yourself. And then see, you know, what is the scholarly conversation around this subset of the topic? And are other articles able to validate what this article is saying? And I know that sounds like a lot, but this is the like key skill of information literacy, right? Being able to find and locate information. And if you can do this, or if you can practice doing this now, this is going to serve you so well for the rest of your life when you find information, regardless of whether it's like an academic journal or anything else.
Okay, thank you. Because I know that like one of the key things too, once you get into the field, once you're out of college and you get in the field, is being able to publish. And I've heard, you know, and you know, you just hear things, but a lot of it was like, well, you're trying to get it published, so you'll send it to anybody to get it published. And that kind of correlates with, is it valid? Should I be looking at it, or should I just toss it to the side and go somewhere else?
Exactly. I'm going to send you a lot of resources because
that's awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm going to send you resources on statistical significance.
Okay.
And discerning information, because I think that this will be helpful for you. And if you have any questions, email me back. I'm happy to jump on a Zoom with you. We could talk more about this. I love talking about this, clearly.
Good.
It's our whole profession. So you're really getting into the nitty-gritty of it. And I'm happy to, you know, chat with you via Zoom or phone, or just email back and forth if you have more questions. So please do not hesitate. I'm going to send you some stuff tomorrow, but if you have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, okay?
Thank you so much. This has been great. I didn't know, I just kind of found out about what was going on with this, and it's been a lot of information. It's great. Thank you.
Great.
I appreciate
You're
it.
so welcome.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for How To Tuesday. My contact information is up on the screen here. So if you have any other questions that we didn't get to today, or if you just want to chat, I'm happy to do that. I love when I get to work with students. Unfortunately, this is our last How To Tuesday of the semester, but we'll be back in the fall. We will be sending out lots of communication about what our webinar series will look like. And again, a little spoiler, we are going to be doing more sessions just like this to provide you more resources. So we're really, really excited about expanding this program and getting more support for all of you. So please let me know if you have any further questions, but have a wonderful day and don't hesitate to reach out to me. Bye-bye.